Last week, after a long, hard battle with cancer, my grandfather passed away in his sleep. He didn't always have the best relationship with me. By the time I was 16, I was smoking weed, growing my hair long. By the time he was 16, I was in the Navy SEALs, sailing out to the Pacific on an aircraft carrier. Needless to say, he didn't understand each other for a long time. But over the past 2 years, we've grown much closer. I guess it's because I grew older. I squared myself away. In turn, he's become a little softer and a little warmer with his old age. I developed somewhat of an interest in military history. So as a result, we'd spend many an hour emptying beer bottles as I coaxed one story after another from him. By the time he died, we were pretty much talking every day, mostly by phone. It became somewhat of a daily highlight for me. Naturally, when my cousin called on Saturday to tell me that he slipped away during the night, I was heartbroken. I simply thanked her for calling, hung up the phone, and sat down on my old coffee-stained couch, weeping uncontrollably. Not so much tears of loss or grief, but tears of joy, tears of thanks that I was able to be lucky enough to build a relationship with him, even for a short time, long after I thought it was far too late. A week or two after his funeral, the same cousin called again to inform me that he and her husband had disclosed an old footlocker from my grandfather's attic. According to them, it was filled with old naval memorabilia, photos, journals, and souvenirs from his time in the Pacific Theater of World War II. I got in my car, drove over to their house immediately. I could only find that footlocker in question. It was securely sealed with a rusty old padlock. My cousin confessed they were not really knowing what was inside, but we agreed that the old Navy U.S. Navy stencil made it very easy to guess. The only thing to do now is find a way to remove that lock. When I finally convinced a mechanic friend of mine to drive over with a pair of big, heavy bolt cutters, we spent an hour to ponder over my grandfather's effects. The photos, my God, those photos of him in his teenage years. He looked just like me. I mean it. It was like looking into a separatone mirror, like looking version of me from an alternate dimension. By the time my friend bid farewell and drove home, I had a solid lump in my throat. If only my grandfather and I could have reviewed the footlocker's contents together. If only we had a little bit more time. It was later that evening, while I polished off a bottle of his favorite variety of Navy rum, I came across a small leather-bound journal hidden in the bottom of the footlocker. Placed neatly on top of it was an old paper ID card, the flimsy kind, the faded ink, that was distributed across services during a time of extreme scarcity. The ID card depicted a logo of sorts, both with English and Japanese characters visible on it. The English characters read ABCC. Confused, I hammered the acronym into Google, wondering why I had never heard him mention such an organization before. It didn't take me long to figure out why. The letters stood for Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. My grandfather was barely out of his teenage years when the Second World War ended. It was without a doubt his favorite story to tell me was in the Navy, when him and his shipmates had gathered round a wireless radio to hear the news of Japanese surrender. He said he'd never seen anyone so happy in all his life. That all the college football touchdowns and lottery winners he's seen couldn't hold a candle to the kind of happiness that he seen on his friends' faces. They were going home. Only they didn't go home. Not for years. I assumed that my grandfather was just a regular part of the operation forces staying in the Japanese islands after the aftermath surrender. But I was wrong. This was part of something uniquely horrifying in the history of warfare. Formed after the war by President Truman, the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission was intended to merely observe, not treat, the effects of the bombs on any survivors. Observe and report, not try to alleviate the suffering. Just observe and report. That thought sent chills down my spine. I open up the journal and begin to read. December 5th, 1946. 17 miles offshore, mainland Japan. We're due to depart to the city of Hiroshima any day now. Captain Releban says will be dirty work, but it won't be counting bodies. It won't just be counting bodies. He says the world has never seen a weapon like this before, and nobody really knows what really happened in Hiroshima. This has all got us excited to see the damage. The crew mostly in agreement, but the Japanese, they all agree that the Japanese deserved what they got. A lot of the guys say this is payback to Pearl Harbor. They're reaping the whirlwind, whatever that is. I wrote home to my mom and her and Pop. They were really proud of me. My grandfather's writing drifting off into thoughts of home. I found myself skimming through the pages until the next mention of Hiroshima. Why haven't my grandfather mentioned it before? Not like he could have forgotten that he was part of an event that shaped human history, an event that birthed a new age of terrifying atomic warfare. I found the next relevant entry and continue reading. December 14th, 1946. Hiroshima City. We patrolled the city for the first time today. None of us could believe that a single bomb would wreak such devastation. Command made us wear gas masks and thick rubber clothing. Made us the monsters. But we saw what our government has done to the city. Even in the light of the Japanese atrocities, we felt like monsters too. The first thing I noticed was silence. Whenever the roaring winds died down, we were greeted with the most hideous stillness that any of us have ever experienced. Years of churning engines and booming ship guns have left us unaccustomed to such lack of noise. It disturbed us greatly. No city should ever be quiet. But it wasn't really a city anymore. It was a dead city. We were walking through the great stone corpse of a concrete cadaver whose bones towered above us in every turn. Yet, not the thing that stuck with me. It's what gave me the shakes. Are the shadows that have been burned into crumbling brick walls. Those shadows of that are all left of the people, burned away into my memory, just like they were burned that morning. Only when I stared dumbfounded at one particular human shape. Perfect outline of a once living human. I swear, I saw it shift. Not by much, but I swear I saw the shape's head twitch a little as I looked. It wasn't just me looking at that haunting charcoal black shape. It was looking at me too. I finished up my glass of rum in one gulp, feeling the chemical warmth of alcohol spread through my guts with a shudder. It was no longer he had never mentioned the things he had seen in Japan. These were terrified delusions of a frightened young man. Maybe he was burned out from the things he's seen in the manifestation of years of suffering. Such unnatural stresses I found myself reading. I found myself reading on before I could consider any further. December 18th, 1946, Hiroshima City. We ventured deeper into the city today, closer towards the epicenter of the blast. It was worse. Much worse. The bodies, God help us, the bodies were beyond counting. In some places, it was hard to even tell where each dead Jap ended and the next began. One carcass of a larger building had what looked like patchwork quilts of burnt bodies carpeted on into its ground floor. It reminded me of that painting I once saw on that Spanish guy, Picasso. I forget the name. Just figures, human-looking figures piled on top of one another, twisted, broken, and charred. Why? What did we do here? Our patrol stopped when we encountered a deep pit of bubbling black sludge. Steam rolled off of it. I could feel the heat through my protective gear. Dared not get any closer. When the wind died down for a moment, bring back that awful silence. That's when we heard it moaning. A deep, muffled groan seemed to vibrate in the black sludge itself. A portion of the sludge bubbled up, forming a loose structure. For the briefest of moments, it looked like a hand, like fingers found reaching out of the bubbling surface of the tar. And then it was gone again. One of the men pointed, emitting his own muted cries of terror as another shape bubbled up in the black sludge before melting back into itself. A face, a clear human face, empty eye sockets, a screaming maw. When we got back, I asked my friend Skip if he saw it too. He said no, and anyone that thinks they need that's seen it needs to get their head examined. None of us has ever talked to that thing since. As long as I knew, my grandfather, he always mocked my love of horror stories. Silly tales for kids and dopes, he told me. There are much scarier things in real life. I had no idea he was talking from experience. It was getting late. I had to work early the next morning, but I pondered myself another glass of strong dark rum and continued reading. December 18th, 1948, 6, Hiroshima City. Today was our last patrol, and we're glad of it. The closer we ventured into the city, the more horrific things we saw. Two sailors had to be taken into psychiatric evaluation after what we encountered last time. The rest of us had a silent agreement not to talk about it before the same thing happens to us. But after today, I'm sure that number is going to get much higher. The lieutenant had us shoot a pack of Japanese dogs that have become feral due to lack of order in the city. On all fours, they bounded out of some ruins in front of us, howling and barking as they limped along. We opened fire with our combines, putting each one down out of its misery without much of a second thought. There was something different about these ferals. One man said it was the effects of the poison of the atomic bomb released to his exposure. Some kind of invisible toxin that floats around in the air and ruins and whatever it touches. It had some sort of horrible effects on Hiroshima's dogs, or at least that's what we told ourselves anyway. When we got closer, we got a good look at what we killed. We started to doubt that these things used to be dogs at all. They were so misshapen, hairless, with molten skin. Wild dogs that were that was the official explanation during the commission briefing. Wild dogs that were suffering the effects of atomic poisoning. But I know different. At least we all know different. They become clumped black fur, matted with pus and blood. I saw something. Something familiar that seemed to shine out from beneath the piles of bird, wool, and skin. Dogs don't wear gold watches. Dogs don't wear rings. Trauma. That's all this is. A young man suffering from post-traumatic stress who couldn't quite compute what kind of destruction he was seeing. I couldn't blame him. Lord knows I would have reacted if I was in his boots. I couldn't tear myself away. March 19th, 1946, USS Cabot. My buddy Bill told me a story today. It was his first visit to Hiroshima. We start calling it the Dead City now. He said it was raining when their landing craft docked. The raindrops fell heavy, fat, and black with dirt and oil. The black rain collected on his goggles and masks, obscuring his vision until they got properly cleaned. He said other things have also fallen from the sky too, collecting on his protective gear. Strands of hair, the odd fingernail, scraps of clothing. I never seen Bill cry before. Even when we lost Jack Holmes, that Japanese kamikaze pilot. But he cried today. He cried when he told me about kindergarten. They found these kids' bodies, all lined up, each with tiny skull fracture. They, like the dogs, were changed. Changed in the ways that he couldn't explain or unsee. Extra eyes, no eyes at all. Extra limbs, heads splitting and duplicating. He cried when he described how their teacher, a charred mess of black, extruded skin, have emerged from the ruins and begged them to kill her. He cried when he told me she knelt before him and pulled the barrel of his combine to her forehead. Bawled like a baby when he said how he pulled the trigger. Enough. I thought and slammed the journal shut, putting it back to the bottom of my grandfather's footlocker before covering up with the other items, hiding it just as he done from the world for myself. I haven't looked at it since. I can't bring myself to read anymore. He spent the rest of his life trying to forget what he's seen in the city. And there I was filled to my head with it all. I tried to cry. I tried to let it all out. But I thought of his friend Bill, how he had to put that poor soul out of her misery. I couldn't cry. I didn't deserve to. I visited my grandfather's grave this morning, planted a little star and stripes on soft soil above him. I am so proud to call him my grandpa. And I think for a while, towards the end, he was proud to call me his grandson. It was painful, but I found myself feeling glad that we were able to find as escape from the terrors that visited him. Terrors he never spoke of. He deserved peace. The things he's seen couldn't reach him anymore. But it hurt that neither could I. Yet, when I looked at the passing by the gravestone next to it, I saw the first name and understood why he insisted on being laid to rest in this particular plot. Bill, it said. They spent the war next to each other, and now they will spend the rest of eternity next to each other. I realized the bond formed between men that face an unspeakable horror, an unbreakable bond of comradeship. The tears had no trouble flowing then. Rest in peace, Grandpa.
And
That's
that
the
was
story.
Shade Foxy telling a story about the first atomic bomb in Hiroshima.